Above a certain level of seniority, EQ starts to become more important than IQ because you're dealing with large numbers of people. It's okay to do that, but it's not good to lose control. Never works out well. So it feels good at the time, but losing control is the one thing I try not to do now. A lot of people have different views of what unlimited PTO means, but at one point, Riot very graciously let me take 3 months off.
Wow. Pick one, EQ, IQ, or AI.
I'd pick an IQ. But I noticed that everyone is upbeat about everything, and every problem is actually a challenge, and every crisis is an opportunity.
Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today, we are tackling two of the biggest questions in tech leadership right now. What matters more, emotional intelligence, artificial intelligence, or raw IQ? And when systems break down or need to be updated, is it better to start from scratch or salvage what you've got? Our guest today has lived these questions in the trenches for many, many years. He's led multi-billion-dollar transformations at companies like Hulu, Riot Games, and many others, navigating high-stakes private equity acquisitions and left behind architectures that are still in use later today. Andrew McVeigh, Chief Architect and veteran technology leader. Thank you so much for being here, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Andrew, funny coincidence. Today I'm at the gym and I see my buddy Stephen Brown. I say, hey, heads up, I think it's been too long, but do you remember working with a guy named Andrew at Hulu? And he laughs. He goes, I remember him very well. In fact, till today, we use his hoop architecture. And he even mentioned that you used to tell people, this is how I keep you guys by running hoops.
Yeah.
What a coincidence.
So Stephen's a great guy. I sat next to him for a while when I was first at Hulu. The idea of a hoop, and that we call it a hoop at Hulu, but the wider name is an RFC, and the idea is just to get people to document as a request for comment a small design of what they're doing next, and allowing people to comment on it. And we do the process at Savoda, where I'm currently at as well. We've done it very successfully, where the idea is to basically allow people to see the architecture being created and comment on it, and we'll ask various people to create RFCs, and we end up with a library. We've got a library of maybe like 30 to 50 at Savoda alone, and it documents. It's essentially like an architectural design decision, and it's also how we teach people to construct architecture and how we grow them in architectural practices.
Nice. Andrew, you worked across finance, gaming, streaming, and healthcare. How did moving across these different industries shape the way you think about leadership and technology?
Yeah, the first thing I'd note is that there's a certain amount of architecture which is domain agnostic. It doesn't matter whether it's video streaming, video games, finance, or whatever. Like, there's a certain amount of practices that you can shift between them. And the other thing I'd note is that when you're at a certain level, there's a lot of domain experts that you can draw on. And so some of these companies, the biggest problem they have is not domain expertise, it's just organisation of large scale for delivering these very large complex systems. Now, there's a lot of trends around, and you learn to blur your eyes a bit and apply best practice regardless of what the current trends are. Like if it's microservices, sometimes it makes more sense not to use a microservice. And you're going against the trends and against the hype, but that's essentially the job of the skilled architect, to apply the architecture and context to solving the particular situation they have in that particular company and in that particular domain.
Do you think companies are wasting great opportunities by overemphasizing industry expertise? I mean, you know what we do. We're a technology consulting and recruiting firm, and sometimes, although we love finding people with domain expertise because it reduces the ramp-up time, sometimes companies are overthinking this piece and are ending up shrinking their pool and not hiring some incredible people because they don't have expert domain expertise. Yet here you are as the chief architect, having gone from banking, healthcare, gaming, industries that couldn't be further from each other. Like, what are your thoughts on that? What's your opinion on that concept?
That's a really deep question. I think you probably need a mixture of both generalists and specialists. Like, people who are specialists, like in video streaming and all of the underlying protocols and stuff like this, are not necessarily specialists in coordinating large-scale architecture. And so I think that's where you need a healthy respect on both sides. So the answer to your question is it depends. And there is space for generalists in larger companies, and I often get brought in when the technology's either got a bit out of control or they want to move the architecture to the next level.
Got it. So for you, it sounds like, yes, it's helpful to have folks with domain expertise, but it shouldn't be treated as an absolute must-have.
Well, it depends on what they're looking for, obviously. So, I mean, like everything in architecture, the architecture you apply depends on the situation and the problem at hand. So a mix of two, but no, you 100% need domain specialists. Like at Hulu, if we didn't have people who understood all the protocols and all of the standards, then it would mean nothing because you can't deliver video to the players. But at the same time, when you're dealing with an organisation of say 800 engineers as we were and a massive refresh of the architecture, you also need generalists who understand how to organise large architectures and large groups of people to construct those architectures efficiently and effectively.
It's really good, really good. When you look at leadership today, tech leadership specifically, what do you think matters more, EQ, IQ, or AI?
Yeah, so I'm going to pause the AI thing for a little bit and I'll address that a bit later. But I was making this point to you the other day when we were talking that above a certain level of seniority, EQ starts to become more important than IQ because you're dealing with large numbers of people. And I'm the poster child for low levels of EQ, right? And I've learned over the years that it doesn't serve me well, like getting angry, getting frustrated. It's not a good response. I've worked with some very senior people who have been absolute masters of emotional stability during times of turbulence. And so I've learned a defeat of some of those. I was talking to a good friend the other day, Raphael, who's one of the VPs at Hulu, and I've seen this guy, he never gets angry, he might betray a level of frustration, but it's always in aid of solving the situation in hand. And so, I've learned over the years to temper my response and to make sure that I'm not just letting my frustration show throughout. And I've had situations I'm not very proud of in companies. I think at Riot Games I actually physically flipped a table on a team, and it feels good at the time, but it never works out well.
Look, sometimes I agree with you, but sometimes showing a little bit of spirit and passion doesn't hurt.
I think that's better. It's okay to do that, but it's not good to lose control.
Oh no, of course.
And I've lost control in other jobs, where I'm like, literally get, at Riot Games they use all this gaming terminology. I've rage quit certain discussions. I've flipped the table literally rather than metaphorically, and never works out well. So it feels good at the time, but losing control is the one thing I try not to do now.
Andrew, I have a tough question for you, but since you don't work there anymore, I can ask.
Yeah.
Riot Games had this thing. We worked with them many, many years ago, and one of the things they had is you must be a gamer, which is fine, and you must be our gamer, and it got deeper and deeper. You must have gone round 17, so on and so forth. It got to a point where we politely had to move on because it just made no business sense. It's like, look, you want your gamers, just reach out to your gamers and try to hire them, right? Like if you want great engineers, that's where we come in. What are your thoughts on that? Were you one of the folks that advocated for that, or did you push back on that concept?
That's you're asking some really interesting questions here. I was actually hired by a great guy who was the director of engineering at the time, running 80 engineers or so, because, in the time I was there, the company grew from 80 engineers up to 800. And
wow.
When he interviewed me, he said, "What do you think of my game?" They just flown me over from London. I said, "I don't really like it." It's the dumbest response you could ever imagine. And to this guy's credit, his name's Mike, and he's a fantastic guy. He's like, "Our game's the best-selling game in the history of the world." And I'm like, "Good point." So they were gracious enough to consider me and hire me regardless of the fact that I wasn't a gamer, and actually made a number of dumb statements in the interview like that. Now, what happened is I was successfully managing the technology, very, very successfully. Right? I could point to a number of very successful initiatives we did. I wasn't a natural gamer, and at one point they asked me to take 2 weeks off and actually play the game. I found it a very frustrating experience. The game's very frustrating, but very fast-paced. It's not really to my sort of taste. But then there was a movement that started internally at Riot where it was started by some of the people, I think partially because they didn't like the fact that people like me weren't avid players of the game, but also partially because you play to your advantage. If you're an avid player of the game and you're maybe a bit junior and you want to become senior, then maybe you could start an internal sort of holy war where people have to play the game. But I think Riot is large enough and successful enough and popular enough that they can probably mine the pool of excellent engineers and excellent gamers. And so that's fair if they want to do that. I mean, it's very hard to claim that I wasn't successful there, even though I maybe wasn't a natural gamer on the game. But at the same time, I think they've probably moved on to the point where it makes more sense to bring in people who do understand the nuances of the game. Yeah, then you get these anti-patterns where they put up this tool at one point where it showed how many hours different people were playing. And some of the engineers were playing 40, 50 hours a week on the game. And I'm like, when's the time for engineering? So I'd argue that you can be a very successful engineer in a domain without having to be a complete fanboy.
Agree. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really funny. They were giving us a tour, and in the cafeteria, I'm sure you remember this, they had TVs and people were watching other people play games. I'm like, wow, this is next level. Am I in a movie? Am I being punked? I mean,
it's a whole thing. I mean, the game is incredible, and watching some of these melee fights and stuff, I couldn't keep track of it in the speed that people were keeping track of it. So I think I probably should have made more of it and got deeper into the game. Even my boss, who was the director of a significant area at the time, used to get in trouble for not playing the game enough. So I think there's a level of passion that's needed to work at a place like Riot, and I think that changed over time. I think I was probably the last of the wave of engineers that were brought in without actually admitting they played the game.
Oh. Andrew, let's go back to the EQ piece, right? Because you talked about your passion and flipping a table and leaders that were really calm and cool. That's great. But tell me about an engineer. I mean, we assume all of these guys are very, very smart and IQ's there. What type of engineers historically have you seen do great work? What was about them that made them better than the average engineer who, frankly, was as smart as them? Or maybe smarter?
Yeah, there's some interesting things. I remember when I moved from investment banking, which is an area typically with very smart engineers, so it's well paid, the engineers are very smart. We moved to Riot Games, and I could honestly say it was the first time I'd been outside of investment banking and seen better engineers than in banking. So there's a lot of talent around that is drawn to these very large, systems and very successful systems. So some of the characteristics of engineers that I saw that were really powerful is you've got to be a good engineer from the start, and being a good engineer means over the years maturing and learning to abstract out in the right way, learning to build the systems in the right way, learning to consider and navigate a path through vague requirements, because the more senior you are, the more vague the requirements should. You can deal with more vague requirements over time, to the point where in investment banking I literally got to the point where one of the managing directors pulled me aside and said, go and sort out the problem that department's having. And I said, what problem are they having? He goes, that's part of the thing, I want you to go and find out what problem they're having. So you get more and more of the problem thrown at you the more senior you get. Now there's another really important thing is you want engineers eventually who work at the level of intention. So they'll say something to me, what do you want the system to do? And I'll explain it, and they go, well, what effects do you want to see? And I'll say, well, I want it to be like this. I want to create a transformation pipeline for this particular messages that do this particular thing in finance. And then they'll start to work at the level of, well, Andrew wanted this particular effect for this reason. So I'll work within those intentions rather than just coming to them and saying, well, I've constructed a completely different architecture. And so when everyone's working around understood intentions, then it becomes very powerful, because then you're able to all move forward. And so eventually someone will come back and say, look, I tried to do what you wanted. It didn't work out, but I think I've preserved most of the effect you're looking for, but I've got a better approach. What do you think?
Very nice. Very nice. So that would be the EQ component. Good communication,
I don't know if it's the EQ
thoughtful.
component. It's more, sorry to cut you off, it's more working at the level of understanding what the effect that they were looking for, and then you understand you're part of a bigger team, and the reason why the person has told you the intention and the effect they're looking for is because it dovetails into other systems.
Yeah. Andrew, leadership isn't just about work, obviously. It's also about balancing your life challenges, right? How has that shaped your own view of EQ?
Yeah, I don't sort of want to go too much into the personal details. I mean, my first wife passed away about 10 years ago, and I had to navigate that while working, because you end up being a single dad. I think having managers who understand the humanity, because the tough thing about software is it's made by humans, but having managers who understand the humanity and are prepared to give you a bit of leeway. Riot Games had this really interesting concept called unlimited PTO, and a lot of people have different views of what unlimited PTO means, but at one point Riot very graciously let me take 3 months off.
Wow.
On full pay to basically work through various issues. So yeah, I think the more I work in this area, the more I realise that it's not just about delivering the results, but it's delivering the results with grace.
Yes.
Where the team ideally should thrive and flourish, and then at the end, I mean, what would be really great, and I can't say I've always achieved this by any means, but what would be really great is at the end people said, I really loved working with Andrew and I'd like to do it again.
Yeah.
That's like the ultimate compliment, right? And I can't say I've always achieved it, because sometimes I've put the results first and the people second, and I think that's really dangerous.
That's huge. That's huge. My former business partner, many years ago, when we started working together, he would see our interactions. Like, we'd be out to lunch together, and one of my former employees would come up and give me a bro hug or something, and he would be like, every time we go out, one of your folks comes and gives you a hug, man. That says a lot about you. I was like, what do you mean? And never thought about it. But, over the years, I realized, the humanity piece is very, very important. You still got to get results, right? You got to get results if you're going to win. You got to get results from your team. You got to drive performance. But, the humanity piece is extremely important.
Well, I'd actually argue that they're both roughly the same thing in terms of getting results, because if people feel psychologically supported, they feel psychologically safe to say, well, I don't agree with your direction, and they feel able to bring their best selves to the table, even if something in their personal life intervenes, then they're going to give you their all. Like a case in point at Savoga, we're doing the API for a very large system. It's millions of lines of code or more, a logistics system, and it needed an API when I first arrived. And I was pairing with another guy called Greg. He's a fantastic guy, and I spent a lot of time with him. We talked about why we create the API, why it was needed, and stuff like that. And then when it came down to the crunch, at one point he was working so hard, I actually had to ask him to back off a bit. And he delivered it. It was incredible. And that's how we got 100% functional test coverage of our releases, through the API that he delivered. But it was literally on the Super Bowl, the Super Bowl that was in LA. And I was in a pub in Santa Monica watching it, and he was contacting me saying, I can't get this thing to work, what's your advice? And I'm like, my advice is you go and get some sleep. He'd been up for 2 days. Now, I'm not suggesting that, I wasn't asking him to work that hard, but he was so invested in the work that he wanted to do that and got a great result.
That's great. That's really great. You and I had a little discussion yesterday about this, but let's talk about AI, right? Some people think, oh my God, we're not going to need engineers in 5-10 years. Some people say, I no longer need junior engineers, only senior. Some people say, no. I couple junior engineers with an AI product and I get damn near senior performance. What are your thoughts on this whole concept of, AI is obviously here. Everybody's utilizing it at this point. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think I talked to you about a story when I was a computational linguist when I first started out. I was doing programming in the Macquarie University Department of Linguistics, and we replaced a woman's set of rules for determining the pitch and the duration of syllables in an artificial intelligence system. We replaced those rules she constructed over 3 years in a PhD with a neural network. And we went from 60% accuracy up to 90% accuracy in a day. And I showed her, expecting her to be super excited, and she was very distressed. Because, there's a feeling that these things are replacing people. And I think as we've got further with these, I think we're realizing that they're not really replacing people, they're replacing the mechanical work of people and the pattern matching work of people. So I think what will eventually happen is that a lot of the mechanical work of programming and the detail-oriented side of it will be replaced by machines. I'd love to be able to say to a machine, here's a large monolith, please break it into microservices and tell me where the hot points are, right? So that we can spend a bit more time in those. I think we've got to rise up above this and move to the level of, well, now I'm maybe specifying to the system, to the AI system, how to construct my system in detail. So I think the need for engineers will stay, but they'll get progressively more and more pushed into the specification realm. I don't think you're ever going to be able to move away from telling the computer what to do. It's not going to work out what the market is and then say, or maybe eventually I'm constructing a company to do this. I think what we're seeing is just pattern matching at a very profound level and a very profound scale. And so it's incumbent on us as engineers to find a way to work within that, to elevate our productivity, to elevate our creativity, and to elevate our art to take use of these new tools.
That's great. So what would be your advice if you were to say, hey, AI is great, look out for this, make sure you use it here, or whatever? What would be your overall opinion to other tech leaders?
So don't forget your craft, right? You still need to learn programming, you still need to learn the detail, because otherwise you can't understand what the machine's doing. They're going to get you 80, 90% there, you're going to have to take it 10% the rest of the way, and sometimes that's the hardest part. You've got to understand what they're creating. And so we're in this weird world where it's taking away a lot of the need to know this stuff, but at the same time you need to know it to pair with the machine. So what I'd say is, don't see it as a threat, see it as an opportunity. Don't forget to learn the craft, because you need that craft, and then progressively ride the wave up the stack until you get to a place where your productivity and your output is increasing with these tools, rather than seeing them as a competitive threat. You know, the old adage, which is, you're not going to be replaced by AI, you will be replaced by someone working effectively with AI.
Yeah, and you definitely believe in that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, I think a lot of these things about, oh my God, all the programs are going to go away is overblown. But it will, like, programming is just such a mechanical task. I can't see how it can't be automated.
Do you, I agree. Do you see if you know, you got all these up and coming young engineers who've spent, 5, 6, 7 years of their lives learning, studying computer science or whatever, and they're going to have a tough time in this market right now. The market's soft, plus you got this AI stuff. Should they be looking at other careers, or is it, hey, hang in there, there'll always be a need for you? Like, what advice would you have for young folks in the game?
Double down on programming with an AI assistant. Understand how to work, how that interface between the person and the machine actually works, because just getting back to that point, you're going to have people using these AI systems very effectively, and they'll gradually become more and more capable, and what you want to do is to be able to utilize them. I don't think it's replacing people, I think it's augmenting them. And so learn how to become one of those augmented engineers, treat it like another tool. When I was younger, there were endless arguments about whether C programs could ever replace assembly programmers, and it's only very specialized areas now that have dedicated assembly programs. It's just another tool.
Andrew, typically I believe in an 80-20 concept. Way
Sure.
Before AI, I've been talking about 80-20,
The Pareto
80-20.
principle. Yeah.
You can apply it in any concept. My personal opinion is that in the next, 5, 10, 20 years, this is going to be more prevalent, but 80% of things and people potentially in jobs could go away. But those top 20% will always be necessary. Do you agree with that concept? And do you agree in engineering similar?
Look, I apply the Pareto principle in pretty much every aspect of my life. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, when we go in to do architectural decisions, people are afraid to make mistakes. And I say, look, as long as we're careful and considered, if we get 80% of the decisions roughly correct, we're batting way above average, right? And the same with building a system. You get 80% of it done or you do it to fulfill 80% of the requirements, you're already way ahead of someone who's trying to make it do 100%.
Yeah.
And so there's so many principles in life where you can get 80% of the value with 20% of the effort.
There's another great concept. You might name it because you're naming all the concepts, but they say perfection is the enemy of done. Right?
Yeah.
If you're sitting around waiting for perfection, nothing ever gets done. Nothing's good enough to launch. Nothing is good enough to put out there.
I love a detail-oriented engineer as much as anyone, but yeah, they've got to be able to. It's a massive anti-pattern to keep doing things to the point where you're no longer getting large marginal utility out of it. Agreed. So hitting that 80% sweet spot with 20% of the effort is probably half of my job.
That's huge. That's huge. Are your teams shrinking, Andrew, because of AI?
No, not my teams personally. Not the programmers in our company at the moment, but we're experimenting with it. We have to be very careful. Software is basically working out the drug dosage for people, so it's extraordinarily careful. We construct it in an extraordinarily careful way. So we may be looking at things like using AI coding assistance for things like constructing unit tests and telling us if there's blind spots in the tests we've missed. We're not applying it to production software at the moment. It's too nascent.
That's very good. That's very, very, very specific. Let's talk a little bit about starting over versus salvaging, the what we call the rewrite dilemma, right?
Yep.
Rewrites are one of the most debated topics in tech. Why did so many fail, and why do people, what's your opinion on starting over versus working with what you have and making it better?
It's so easy just to say we want to start over. Because it's harder to read what's there already and understand what's there already than to put the effort into understanding the 10,000 business decisions that went into the construction of the current system. So in 2002, I worked on a very large rewrite of a very venerable set of financial systems at a very, very old London institution. And I won't name it, but it was basically a consultancy had come in and they said, we want to rewrite all your systems. There's a better way. We're going to replace everything with a generalized system, which is configuration based. And it was an unmitigated disaster. I was basically in the tech lead for about a third of the program by the time I decided that this is never going to result in anything. They made every possible mistake they could be made. They brought in something like 5 different consultancies because they didn't want one consultancy running the show. They decided to train all of the COBOL programmers on J2EE, which, it's a heavyweight technology. It was very difficult to use. It had its own set of problems. They decided to teach everyone UML and object-oriented analysis and design. And everything that could go wrong went wrong, and such a fantastic learning opportunity. At the time, it was incredibly painful. But the big mistake they made is by not breaking the rewrite problem into smaller and smaller chunks until you get to a point where you can actually get the value out of it, that 80% of the value for 20% of the effort. They wanted to just completely remake the world, but when you think about it, you're working on a system for settling swaps, and there's like literally 10,000 different edge cases encoded in that complex system over 30 years, which you're now saying, I'm going to replace that? That's ludicrous. So the thing is, it's always worth investing time into seeing whether or not you can rebuild incrementally. So what we do typically, and what we did at Savoda, is we define a North Star. This is where we want to get to. This is what we want the systems to look like. This is our strategy. And then we define an incremental vision for a safe way to get there that delivers value on every single increment. You've got to do something like this because if you don't define the strategy, someone else will come in and define it for you. It'll probably be a consultant the company brings in and it will be a disaster. And everyone has been to the place where they're like, we want to make this huge new system, but they don't define an incremental path to getting there. Both of those are so important. And say with a complex system, you typically don't need to rewrite every part of it. You define what you want the strategy to be, and then you rewrite small parts of it, or maybe you partition small parts of it out into microservices, or maybe you keep it as a modular monolith in line with not accepting the hype of the moment. So it's got to be well customized for the domain you're in, and you've got to be very respectful, I think, of the fact that most of these large rewrites occur in companies that have already been successful. When I was at Riot Games and they said, we need to rewrite parts of these systems, right? They're doing it, or we need to take it to the next level. They're doing it in the context of making billions of dollars. It's very hard to feel bad about that because the only reason they're able to do the rewrite is because they're successful.
Are they doing this because the current system is not scalable? Is just outdated and it affects performance? Like, why do these large companies do these digital transformations or these rewrites or whatever?
They usually do it because the thing that brought them to the success that they're at now is not enough to bring them to the next level.
Yeah.
So at Riot Games, it might be it's not scaling well enough. They had the concept of shards, and each shard can only handle 1 million players or so. Or they might find that the engineering is too complex and they're making too many mistakes because when you add in something, bugs appear in other places, things like that.
Makes sense.
And so it's that old adage, right? The thing that got us to here is not going to be enough to bring us to the next level.
Andrew, what you described reminded me of building homes, right? It's always easier to just build a blocky new home, build it from scratch. You don't have to worry about old plumbing and all electricity. But if you're dealing with a beautiful, mid-century Tudor house, you don't want to tear it down. There's so much value in the bones and the architecture that maybe you just need to just update it a little bit, right?
Could be. I mean, that's a very profound concept you've just raised because the concept of the analogies between construction in the real world and software construction have been made for years, right? And they don't always hold up. Because in theory, right, like replacing a house, everyone knows what is a house, right? And they know how to construct it. And
it's very tangible.
Yeah, it's very tangible. But it's also probably not going to have a million different business use cases encoded into it, right? Well, unlike a piece of software, right? The order of complexity of a physical construction of a house is probably nowhere near the order of complexity of the physical construction of, say, a 10 million line of code piece of software for doing business operations. The second thing you mentioned, though, is a really important one, and you were touching on the sort of architectural beauty of an older place. Like, sometimes there's very good reasons to preserve the things that are in place. In a case with a building, you might say, well, this is a 16th century Spanish villa. Why would we knock it down? It represents the epitome of elegance and charm. People very rarely say that about software, by the way, because software degrades far more quickly than houses.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Software
Why does it degrade so quickly, Andrew?
Requirements change. The platforms we build on change all the time. Like, you know, the concept of bit rot is the system is just stuck there doing the same thing. Sorry, again, internet problems. The software is just stuck doing the same thing, and things are moving around it. It's not like the software itself is actually physically degrading, because nothing stays the same in software. You know, platforms being end of life to new platforms coming along. You know, just today we're about to release some software. We realised that one of the packages that was 3 months old has a security vulnerability into it. You know, we do a scan on it, and they're like, "Guys, why are you using this one?" I'm like, "Well, 3 months ago it was fine. Now it's not."
Yeah. Andrew, you go into a company that tells you, guys, we want to rebuild this thing, right?
Yep.
We want to actually not rebuild it. We want to start from scratch. What are some questions you ask, and what do you say?
So there was this really fantastic paper by a guy called Joel Spolsky back, I don't know, it's probably 25 years ago now, on why Netscape lost the browser war to Internet Explorer. So it's already an ancient paper. But he raises an essential point, which is you want to rebuild your system. What are your competitors doing in the meantime? Because they're sure as hell not going to wait 3 years for you to rebuild your system. So if while you're rebuilding your system, trying to get parity with your existing system, your competitors are adding in new features, they're revising paradigms, maybe introducing revolutionary new approaches. And so you're sitting still, for 3 years just to rebuild something to get parity with what you already got. It's a very dangerous mindset. Now, the other problem is that whenever teams rebuild, they typically don't take the current team that's made the current thing and say, right, you guys are going to be part of it. They'll brand them the legacy team and then look down on them. And we see this again and again. I've even been in that 2002 debacle. I was one of the people saying, you guys are legacy now. And that's such an arrogant thing to say to these people who've built the company up to a point where you're getting hundreds of millions of dollars in sales, and they've sweated blood to put all those complex use cases into the system. All of a sudden you're saying, no, I've got it from here. You guys are a legacy with the wave of the future.
Go sit in the warehouse. in the warehouse. Yeah,
Crazy.
That's a really interesting way to look at those things.
So understanding the value in the system is really important, and understanding how to preserve that value while you still move it forward is a hard job, but you've got to do it, because rewriting a system is fun. I've done it before, and I'll tell you about one where we had to rewrite a system, but rewriting a system is basically, the first year you feel great. I feel like a god. Those legacy losers over there, you know, they don't understand the new technologies, but we do, right? Second year, you're not feeling so great when you realise that you've bitten off maybe more than you can chew. And then the third year, you're going to feel terrible when you realise that actually those systems that are still in production, because yours isn't, are actually doing a lot more than you thought.
If I'm a leader of a company, Andrew, I need someone like you to be very opinionated and tell me, look, sure, you want to pay me and a bunch of people to create something that's easier to build from scratch and just do this thing, sure, but it's the wrong decision. It's the wrong
Not always the wrong decision, but I'd say 80% of the time, getting back to the 80-20 thing, right? It is a decision where people have put more effort into thinking about where they want to be than the incremental way they're going to get there. If you don't put as much effort into both of them, and no one wants to think about the boredom of incrementing your system, right? It's tough, right? If you don't put as much effort into that as where you're headed strategically, then you're probably doing it wrong. And I would argue that when a rewrite is basically done from laziness, I don't really want to understand the existing system that looks too hard to evolve, then it's probably the wrong decision. Now, in 20% of the cases, you're dealing with something so significant you have no choice. At Riot Games, for the lead client update, I architected that approach for the new one, and we completely rewrote it, and now it's on 120 million desktops or so. And you know the architecture's successful when someone stops you at a party 7 years later and says, we're still using the same architecture, but it sucks. And you're like, well, yeah, whatever. If an architecture lasts 7 years, you're doing pretty well. But in this particular case, the first version was built on Adobe Air, and that platform was end-of-lifed by Adobe. So things are moving around it so fast that you have no choice but to rewrite it.
So the 20% of the time, it was funny. You actually answered my next question: is when is it appropriate to do a full rewrite? And I think you answered it, but I don't know if there's more you want to add.
Let me give you a bit of a methodology here, right? What you do is you look at the system and you work out what are the core things and how you partition the system so that you can evolve the different bits separately. That might mean in a modular monolith, breaking it into modules and then replacing some of the interfaces in the modules with microservices. That might mean building out a set of microservices and harvesting out of the monolith so that the monolith can interact with a new set of microservices. And all these things are basically the thinking of how you evolve something and how you move it forward without necessarily throwing the entire system out. Throwing the entire system out, if you look at a spectrum of we're keeping everything as it is all the way through to, so my hands are not in the picture, keeping everything as it is all the way through to throwing it out completely, you're going to sit on that spectrum somewhere. And unless you've considered very carefully why you're sitting on the spectrum and where you're sitting on the spectrum, then it's probably going to be a lazy decision, and those never work out.
Got it. I'm going to ask you some tough questions here, and I know you're not going to be able to do it, but try. If you have to pick one, EQ, IQ, or AI.
I'd pick IQ, but I'd note that the more senior you are, the more important EQ is. To the point where if you have someone who's super senior and they've got high EQ but very low EQ, they can cause more damage than good. Massive amount of damage.
Okay, very good. What's your favorite book? And at the same time, what do you recommend for leaders to read?
I wrote some of these down the other day. I mean, I like reading books about the way that humans are organised, and what the repercussions of those organisations are. There's a fantastic book called Red Plenty, sort of analysing the central planning of the communist system in Russia and other countries, and it's phrased as a series of fictional stories looking at the second-order effects of top-down planning. So I like reading things like that. And the technical book that had the biggest impact on me, bizarrely enough, was a very old book called Object-Oriented Analysis and Design by a guy called Grady Booch. And that's where I learned that it's possible to find an intuitive way to design software that is also systematic. And so I'm a big advocate of object-oriented analysis and design. I did my PhD on component design and extensibility, but object-oriented analysis and design was the first time I realised there was an intuitive way to be systematic about software. Because you're picking nouns and verbs out of the real world.
Got it. That's good stuff. If you could leave one lasting piece of advice for tech leaders, what would it be? Yeah,
I think attitude and optimism are so important in software. I come from Europe for most of my career, and it's just the way that Europe works is everyone complains about everything. And I got brought over to the US, to Santa Monica by Riot Games, and I noticed that everyone is upbeat about everything, and every problem is actually a challenge, and every crisis is an opportunity. And for me, that pivot in my head made a lot of sense. And so people in Europe typically think, oh, Americans are overly optimistic and it's just this ridiculous cheerfulness, forced cheerfulness. I actually argue it's a very powerful paradigm.
Absolutely.
And so another thing that I was brought up on very sharply by the Riot's CTO at the time, I came to him with a problem and he goes, do you know how to solve this problem? I said, I absolutely do. And he goes, well, what are you coming to me with a problem for? And so I think, collectively we're much better at solving problems than we think.
Interesting. Hence where the IQ is very important, is the ability to diagnose problems and have a solution in mind.
Well, I would argue that that's partially EQ. Because
True.
anyone can complain, and smart people are better at complaining than most
Oh, yeah.
because they see the problems. But the EQ is basically, look, I'm going to own this problem and I'm going to solve it.
I love it. I love it. Andrew, how can people find you? I mean, you should have a book. If you haven't written a book already, you should.
No, I haven't written a book. That's an interesting thought. Thank you. I mean, you can reach me at andrew.mcveigh@gmail.com if you want, or find me via LinkedIn.
Amazing.
Yeah, I haven't. I've been heads down for the last 4 years or so.
We got you out of the cave. It only took your daughter to make this happen. So, thank you, Andrew, for your time. I've learned so much. Thank you and Bella for setting this up. But it's rare we can go this deep on a concept. I'm sure we could do this all day, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time. Let's stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Avetis.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avetis Antaplyan, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.